Without further ado, let's start today's session. You may know that the biggest increase in carbon emissions in 2021 took place in electricity and heat production, which contributed to 46% of the global increase. The good news is that despite the post-COVID rebound in coal use and carbon emissions, renewable-based energy generation reached an all-time high in 2021. Various new technologies present new ways to harness renewable energy. Experiences from all around the world start to be available to guide us in efforts to upscale. And this session today brings together professionals from Africa and Asia to present case studies on projects which are decarbonizing both supply side and demand side sectors, resulting in local and global carbon emission reduction. Some of the presented projects today are solar integrated battery energy storage systems, solar-based mini-grids, large-scale floating solar projects, commercial-scale BioCNG production, and electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So these projects are implemented in a manner to create models with potential to replicate at scale. The learnings will help in standardizing the implementation of these solutions and developing the best practices for wider outreach and adoption. Now, before we give the floor to presenters, we will listen to the welcoming message of GGGI's President and Chair, Mr. Ban Ki-moon.
Excellencies, distinguished participants and guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome all of you to this year's Global Green Growth Week, organized by the Global Green Growth Institute. Your participation is evidence that we, the global community, demand climate action, and I want to thank you for doing your part to drive and empower green growth. The climate crisis is perhaps the defining crisis of our times. Every year, we can read and hear more and more about the devastating impacts of extreme weather systems, and this year is proving to be one of the worst years yet, with the record floods, the droughts, and the heat waves, all of which lead to displacements from homes, food crises, and wildfires that disrupt and destroy the lives of millions. We are destroying our hope for a better future, and we need to work together to save our planet. I'm pleased to know that so many of you are coming together to exchange ideas, solutions, and best practices on how to advance the implementation of the Paris Climate Change Agreement, the framework which I helped establish during my time as the Secretary General of the United Nations. I'm especially pleased to know that many of you are joining from all corners of the world, including Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, and the Pacific, and many of the solutions to be discussed are coming from women and indigenous communities who are most affected by climate change. I encourage you to take full advantage of Global Green Growth Week and engage with one another as green growth champions and practitioners. The climate crisis will require collaboration and collective action from each and every one of us, because climate change knows no borders, and climate change does not discriminate based on race or social class. We can transform our economies and societies and live a better future, a sustainable and inclusive future, only if we work together. The challenges will be difficult and there are no shortcuts, but if we work together urgently, I think we can do it. As I have said before, there is no plan B, because there is no planet B either. I hope you will join me to make the world a better place for future generations. I wish you very fruitful and successful events during Global Green Growth Week. Thank you.
Now, Dr. Kyung-Nam Shin, Assistant Director General of GGGI, is kindly sharing with us his opening remarks.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all speakers, experts, colleagues, and participants. I welcome you all to this session on green transition, scaling up renewable energy, Africa and Asia experience. The COVID-19 pandemic has transformed the way we think about economic growth and social development. Global landscape and approach for the growth and development has changed. Transition to greener, inclusive, and resilient future is the priority and path choices of many our partner member governments. Many developed and developing economy countries are using this as an opportunity to increase energy access through renewable energy use and to foster economic growth. Currently, the global renewable energy generation capacity is 3,064 gigawatts, with capacity increase of 257 gigawatts, 9.1% growth rate alone in 2021. Interestingly, Asia accounted for 60% of new capacity last year. However, Africa has 60% of global solar energy resources, yet it only has 1% installed solar PV capacity. Solar and wind energy projects are now becoming commercially viable and competitive with the conventional fossil fuel-based project. However, floating solar, offshore wind, energy storage, BioCNG, among others, are some of the new upcoming technologies with tremendous potential. While the mini grid and smart grid are the most viable solution to provide universal access to electricity, the electrified irrigation pumps are crucial for growth of a sustainable and resilient agriculture sector in Africa. Africa also has the potential to become a leading player in hydrogen, green ammonia made from renewable energy. I'm glad to see that all The session is designed to highlight and share the learnings, experience, and best practice of upcoming renewable energy technology, which are prominent in Asia and Africa. I'm looking forward to discussions and deliberation along this session discussion. Thank you so much. We can now begin the technical presentations of the expert. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shin. In the meanwhile, I was reminded here to speak slowly to allow our interpreters to do their work. And I want to remind all the speakers to the same. Please speak slowly enough, but also please do keep your timing. And so for the information of the audience, we do have interpretation in Spanish and French available in this meeting. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Nishant Bardwai to give his presentation. Mr. Bardwai is GGGI's country representative in India, and he leads our community of practice on renewable energy. In this role, he is leading technical advisory, strategy, planning, and implementation of renewable energy programs. He oversees the development and execution of GGGI's renewable energy engagements at country, regional, and global level. Nishant has worked for more than 20 years on renewable energy systems, on power sector reform, and on green infrastructure finance in 13 countries. He will now give us an overview of green transition initiatives in Africa and in Asia to set the scene for our session. Nishant, please, the floor is yours.
I'm trying to share my screen. Please let me know if you can see my screen, okay? Thank you, Laura. Can you see my screen?
It's coming. Yes, we can see it now.
Okay. Can you see this in the presentation mode, or it is still...
No, not yet. It's still on the working mode.
All right. Okay.
Now it's fine.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Laura, for the introduction, and thank you for having me here. This is how I have organized my presentation today. I will give an overview of global landscape on renewable energy and net zero transition. Some of the views are already expressed, but I will show them with more data and information. I'll also speak about key technology solutions and trends, and overview of GGGI global programs and projects, and we'll see how much we can cover in the allotted time. So Laura, please do let me know if I'm crossing my time. I'll try and keep it within the time that I have. Thank you. So as you can see from this slide and the figure on the left, that the current global CO2 emissions are about 35 gigatons, the annual emissions, and mainly contributed by energy-related activities and the industrial processes. On the figure, the right side figure is actually giving a much clearer picture, which is actually stating that with all the pledges on the table, the global CO2 emission is expected to remain at 36 gigatons by the year 2030. That's the annual global emissions. However, the trajectory for net zero by 2050 would require reducing the emissions to 22 gigatons by 2030. Clearly, there is a gap in achieving the 2030 net zero targets. Various measures are required to bridge the gap. Cost-effective technology measures such as clean energy will alone contribute significantly in bridging the gap. Over 40% of the 2030 emission gaps can be actually be bridged by these cost-effective technology solutions, which includes wind, solar, EVs, and other applications, and methane emission reductions. On this slide, which is again a very interesting slide to have an overview of what's happening in the renewable energy space, there is a tremendous growth in the annual renewable energy capacity addition, reaching about 315 gigawatts in the year 2021. However, to remain within the net zero trajectory, the annual renewable energy capacity addition should reach 1,000 gigawatts, which is about 3 times of the current annual capacity addition. Solar and wind will have a major share of this trajectory and the transition pathways. As you can see on the figure on the right-hand side, all that means is a total annual clean energy infrastructure investment of about USD $4.5 trillion, which is a significant increase from the current levels of $1 trillion. Again, this slide is all about what's happening in the renewable energy landscape. The figure on the left highlights the growth rate, and there is a very high growth rate for solar and wind energy technologies in the last 1 decade, and has attracted around 90% of the total renewable energy investments in 2021. As you can see from the figure on the right, the Asia region is currently the fastest growing region in terms of renewable energy addition, but with a share of 50% of the total installed capacity globally. And the yellow figure that you see, the bar chart there, the Africa region has the highest solar energy potential in the world, but has seen one of the lowest renewable energy deployment, suggesting that there is a massive potential for accelerating renewable energy deployment if we can address some of the key challenges in the region. Now, again, this is a figure which is basically highlighting the new emerging technologies, such as the floating solar and the offshore wind. As you can see from this graph, that the floating solar capacity would reach about 4 gigawatts by the year 2026. Asia holds more than 85% of the global installations for floating solar and is expected to continue to dominate. But you can see in the pie chart that Africa and Asia has very high technical potential for floating solar. And as you know, some of these studies suggest that the total potential for floating solar, the technical potential is over 4,000 gigawatts. Similarly, the offshore wind, this technology is also emerging and expected to reach about 820 gigawatts by the year 2050. So all these technologies are suggesting that there is an opportunity to increase or accelerate the deployment of renewable energy globally. Green hydrogen, again, this is another emerging option for decarbonizing the hard-to-abate industries. From the graph, you can see that about 90 million tons of hydrogen is produced today, and 96% of what is produced today is a gray hydrogen, which emits a lot of carbon dioxide. And 90% of the entire hydrogen that is produced today is used by the refineries and for the fertilizer production. There will be 6-fold increase in the hydrogen production by the year 2050. And the next age use of hydrogen in the sectors like transport, building, steel, and cement will drive this demand. The entire gray hydrogen will transit to green or blue hydrogen, which means zero carbon emissions, which would mean 80 gigatons or 80,000 million tons of emission reductions by 2050. And that would mean 7,000 million tons per annum of greenhouse gas emission reductions. So this is an area to watch closely, as there is a huge demand coming in the market. Now, talking about some of the GGGI global programs on renewable energy, starting from green hydrogen, GGGI is doing a global program on green hydrogen in 4 countries, and there is more demand for doing in many more countries. Our project in Indonesia, for example, is a 1 gigawatt project by the year 2026 in 2 phases. The first phase is a 10 megawatt electrolyzer plant in a North Sumatra region of Indonesia using geothermal energy, which is basically 24/7 renewable energy, and then scaling this up to 1 gigawatt over a period of time. We also have a project in India, which is basically trying to establish an institutional mechanism to bridge the price between gray and green hydrogen, which is again an innovative financial instrument because the price differential between gray and green is seen as one of the biggest barriers for promoting the green hydrogen. Oh. I have some problem in moving down my slides, but let me see. Okay, now we also have a project in Nepal, which is again starting with the pilot scale of 5 megawatt and then increasing it to 100 megawatt. The hydrogen produced here will be used in the fertilizer sector. Similarly, in Morocco, we have a project. As you know, Morocco has the highest phosphate reserves in the world, but it still imports about 2 million tons of ammonia. There will be a demonstration project and then followed by a full-scale project associated with the fertilizer industry. Talking about the BioCNG, GGGI has a global program on BioCNG, or the biological compressed natural gas, or the CBG, this is different names, but this is the same thing. Is a natural gas or the biogas that is produced from agriculture and other organic waste. The idea of this program is to create an enabling environment in these 3 target countries, India, Indonesia, and Thailand. While in India, there is a policy framework that exists to support BioCNG, but still the targets are so big, 5,000 projects by the year 2030, and there is no template for replication. So GGGI is making an intervention to create a template for replication and working with 12 BioCNG projects, working with different stakeholders, creating a business model for replication. In Thailand, it is more about upgrading an existing biogas industry, whereas in Indonesia, the idea is to create a policy framework and then develop a template for replication in Indonesia, because Indonesia is still working on its policy framework for BioCNG. And it's a very promising area. We already have about $130 million on the table to make investments in BioCNG projects in these 3 countries. Solar irrigation, again, this is an area where water, energy, and agriculture nexus exist. And there's an opportunity for resource conservation in all the connected areas. GGGI is trying to establish a trust fund to implement 1 million solar pumps in 13 countries. And that would result in $5 billion worth of an investment in solar irrigation space. We already have a Danish-funded program in 3 countries in Africa, in Ethiopia, in Uganda, and Burkina Faso. But this is an attempt to create a one approach addressing common challenges across various African countries on solar irrigation. This is my last slide. This is an example of GGGI's intervention in the floating solar space. GGGI is a technical and financial advisor to Government of India in the state of Madhya Pradesh and has developed a 600 megawatt floating solar projects, which is the single largest grid connected project on a water body till date, which means a total investment of $350 million. And 300 megawatt is already bidded out to the private sector based on the financial structure that has been developed. Another 300 megawatt will get closed within this year. This is an example of showing that this technology, floating solar, is although upcoming, and expensive, but it's still possible to be implemented in developing countries. So I'll stop here, Laura, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Many thanks, Nishant. So reminder to the audience, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat or in the Q&A area, and we will take them then in the end of the whole session. So our next speaker is Mr. Praver Kumar Agarwal, Chief General Manager at GAIL India Limited, who will be talking about growth opportunities in Indian BioCNG sector. So we'll hear more detail now on some of the themes that Nishant referred to. Mr. Agrawal has more than 32 years of experience on managing domestic gas marketing, joint venture coordination, CBG business, development of LNG for transportation across India, use of hydrogen in CGD networks, sale of coal-bed methane, and sale of natural gas through virtual pipelines. So, Mr. Agarwal, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Greetings of the day to distinguished speakers and participants. I will just load the presentation. Just a minute. So there are various opportunities in India on biogas, and as we know that in bioethanol field already India has crossed the limit of 10%. So already more than 10% of fuel is on bioethanol, and similar is our target for biogas in India, or BioCNG, we call it next, please. So we are ourselves putting up CBG projects, as well as we are open for various joint venture opportunities, and very soon we'll be having few joint ventures wherein we would be setting up several such plants. This is just one sample of a plant wherein we'll be producing around 5 tons per day of biogas, and so there will be several such plants in very near future. So this is one kind of pathway which we are taking, wherein we would be setting up several plants across India. That is one. Next, please. Second one is, as was also mentioned by the previous speaker, the Satat initiative of government is there, which is sustainable alternative towards affordable transportation. In this, what happens is that across India there will be almost 5,000 plants, CBG plants, which will be set up, and that whatever biogas will be produced, that will be purchased and at a very good rate. And GAIL has also issued almost 267 letters of intent. 400 is our target by next year, and so many plants will be coming up, and we'll be doing the marketing for them. Next, please. The pricing framework in India is such that it is little better than the LNG prices. So long-term LNG prices, we are paying little more than that in India, so that biogas offtake is done in a very attractive manner. Next, please. So these are the distance. Next. Now, I just wanted to mention this slide. It is a very important slide from Indian perspective, that across India, the entire India has been now distributed into 89 geographical areas, and they have been auctioned and they have been given to various entities now. So in each of these areas, one entity or other will have the right to develop that area for PNG and CNG connections and also for industrial and commercial connections. So they will have exclusivity kind of thing. And this will result in very wide use of huge use of natural gas, and part of that will be from biogas. And this biogas is supposed to be generated in distributed areas because raw material will be available in at several places across India, and that raw material bio waste will be converted to this biogas, and that will be used up across India. So we have also come up with another scheme. Next slide, please. You can go to next one. So we have come up as GAIL India Limited. What we have done is we have come up with a scheme wherein what we are doing is we are cross-subsidizing the biogas plants. So effectively, what happens is we are buying gas from biogas plants at a higher rate. At present, it is $1082 rupees per MMBTU, which is around $13–14 per MMBTU, and we'll be increasing this price further very soon. And then we have one cheap set of gas which is available, which is called administered price mechanism gas, and we have been allowed to mix that. And then we give this gas to all the city gas distribution companies. So what happens is in this process, the biogas, all three are winners. So it is a win-win. It's kind of a scheme. Biogas plant producers, they get a very high price, which is even 5 to 10% more than the LNG price. And the CGD entities, they get it at a price which is very low compared to the market price, because it is mixed with the locally produced administered price gas. So this scheme is expected to bring a lot of gas production, CBG production across India, and we hope that it will be sold in various sectors. We have kept 3 options of delivery points also. Next, please. So what we have done is, one option we have kept is that this gas can be compressed up to 200 to 250 bar and put on a cascade of cylinders and then sold to vehicles directly. So this is one option. The second option is that the delivery point is from basically the biogas plant. So instead of the producer carrying away that cascade to the sale point, directly the city gas distribution companies will take it up from biogas plant. So that is the second part B of the same thing. The next one is that the gas will be mixed with the normal natural gas, and through that synchronization scheme, it will go. So best thing is that this is the right time in India, that because across India, as I was telling, almost 289 geographical areas have been made, and within that there will be networks, gas networks within each of GA. And so wherever, even at a remote place, if one puts up a biogas plant, they'll find some gas network nearby, and then they'll be able to sell that gas through this and through the synchronization scheme, which fetches them better price and good offtake for that gas. Next. So apart from these initiatives, what we are doing is we have an initiative called PUNK, which is equivalent of feather, wings. So what we are doing is for all the and across the CBG value chain, we are talking to various entrepreneurs, and if they are interested, they can take support from our organization, and we'll be investing in their equity if they want. And so already we have funded, I think, 5 companies, and many of them are doing very well. So this is another initiative wherein we are continuously inviting interest from various stakeholders in this biogas value chain. Next, please. Apart from this, we are continuously on the job for advocacy in policy making, because we believe that this is the best thing which can happen for India, because we have a lot of biomass available across India. A lot of waste is also there, bio waste, and it is felt that if that bio waste or biomass is converted to green molecules, it will be the best thing. And we are already short in terms of natural gas. We are importing almost 50% of our natural gas. So if going forward we are able to place even 20-30% of this natural gas from biogas, there will be nothing like this. So as GAIL, we are continuously working on these objectives. And so this CBG-CGD synchronization scheme was formulated basically at our request. And we hope that this is going to change the landscape of biogas in India, because many plants will be coming up. Once we give them a very good price, so automatically things will change. So this is one very important thing. We are also very actively participating in meetings with banks, and we are very soon we are going to bring along with World Bank a very good financing scheme for CBG projects, which will have low interest rate and less collateral. So that scheme is already almost finalized. If that comes up, it will make terms and conditions very easy for biogas producers. Next is that although this is something about fertilizers, so we are not, it is difficult for us to market that, but we are requesting various stakeholders in this value chain and BioCNG and Ministry of Fertilizer that these two things, like the biogas and the organic fertilizer, these two things are equally important for any biogas plant. And very soon this policy will come up that this organic fertilizer which is made through these plants will be compulsorily sort of taken away from these plants for being sold in the market. Next, so very soon this subsidy scheme is also expected from MNRE through MOP. So basically there is a Ministry of Renewable Energy, and they will be coming up with a scheme wherein the financial assistance will be provided to these companies. Apart from this, we are continuously holding the CBG entrepreneurs. Almost every day we have 1 or 2 meetings with various budding entrepreneurs, wherein we are trying to tell them whatever new schemes are there, the benefits, and continuously we are working on these things so that biogas is going in it grows in India. Next is so these are the recent developments. Just I think second last slide from our side. The prices, focus is on prices. The prices we are increasing for biogas, so that automatically once you find that you are putting up a plant and your return on equity is very good, then lots of entrepreneurs will come for this scheme. So this is one focus area. Second, and the price which is mentioned here, it will be increased further. So this is equivalent to almost $14 per MMBtu, and we are going to increase it to maybe $18 or $19 per MMBtu, which is much better than the long-term LNG price. The second point is about again the fertilizers. So offtake of fertilizer is very important, and we are continuously in touch with these policymakers. MNRE's umbrella scheme, National Bioenergy Program, in principle approval has already been accorded, and it will be coming up very soon. It will be in the public domain very soon, and we are issuing a lot of letters of intents for these projects, so that we'll have a hand-holding with them for 15 years. Next. So this is the last slide from us. And so basically what we are saying is that the commingling of mandatory, should be mandatory in CNG transport and PNG domestic sector. Second one is that we are seeking a 15 years extension for this scheme. Third one is CVG blending obligation for CGD entities, which will create demand side market mechanism. And fourth one is actually what we are doing is we are trying to make a fund which will help these companies put the last mile connectivity with the grid. So wherever there is a distance of, let's say, 2 kilometers or 5 kilometers from the plant to the network, so we are trying to set up a fund also for the last mile connectivity for these plants. So that's all from us. There is a very bright future of biogas in India, and this will definitely help, in the environmental campaigns, which all of us are seeking the improvement in the environment. Thanks a lot.
Many thanks, Mr. Agarwal. Very interesting. Our next speaker is Mr. Ose Yelkuni, Energy Program Officer from GGGI Burkina Faso. Ose coordinates work with Burkina Faso's Rural Electrification Agency and national authorities to establish a viable business model and regulatory environment that enables the electrification of villages outside the national grid by private initiatives. He has experience of research work and as well as working with public and civil society entities around the questions of renewable energy in Burkina Faso and in West Africa. So Ose, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share.
We cannot hear you. Please check your mic.
Is it okay now?
Yes, now we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to share our experience on solar mini-grid system in Burkina Faso. My presentation will be focused on 5 points. Next, the context, the project objective and target, the implementation approaches, the feasibility study result, and the perspective. Let's talk about the particularity of Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso is a landlocked country where 80 million people live in poverty and 90% of them in rural areas. In terms of access to electricity, you can see that urban areas have 60% access to electricity and only 3% in rural area, corresponding to more than 7,000 localities living without electricity access. You may also note that the cost of electricity is very high. It's about 0.22 to 0.25 US dollar per kilowatt hour, compared to ECOWAS region, 0.18 US dollar per kilowatt hour. Next, please. Why the implementation of solar mini-grid system is an opportunity for Burkina Faso? The image on the right shows the possibility to electrify villages using solar energy. In fact, solar technology has advanced so that now we can use solar energy to electrify remote area. The solar mini-grid system is an interesting alternative solution for quick and easy rural electrification. With low operating and maintenance costs, it's also easy to use and environmentally friendly. In view of the challenge, next please, in view of the challenge related to the electrification of Burkina Faso and the opportunity offered by solar technology, we proposed the project to promote solar mini-grid in Burkina Faso with objective to create an enabling business environment and demonstrate commercial and financial viability of providing access to electricity for vulnerable people. And we have 4 specific objectives. The first one is to analyze the policy and regulation gaps for solar mini-grid development, to carry out feasibility studies for rural electrification in 2 localities in Burkina Faso, and in addition with Burkina Faso context, to propose a business model and mobilize green finance for solar mini-grid development. The state commitment and its adoption will ensure the sustainability of our projects. That's why, in terms of implementation approach, we have established a partnership with the National Agency for rural electrification and the Ministry in charge of energy and the Ministry in charge of environment. And next, please. First of all, we have set up a criteria with the support of the National Agency for Rural Electrification to select 7 localities according to the criteria. And after that, we carry out a field mission to assess all the selected localities. And this assessment allows us to choose 2 best localities for the feasibility studies. The 2 localities are the locality of Ledere in the central-north region of Burkina Faso and the locality of Zougo in the north region of Burkina Faso. Next, please. To ensure that we will achieve all the results of our data feasibility study, we have set up a technical committee to guide and to review and validate the result of the feasibility study. And the feasibility study is composed by the policy and regulation gaps analysis, the technical study, economic and financial analysis, the business model, environmental and social evaluation, and the gender impact analysis. Now we will talk about the result. Next, please. In the locality of Zougo, the size of solar mini-grid system has been estimated at 290 kilowatt peak for a production of 660,000 kilowatt hour per year, and about 601 households and income. And about 223 tons of CO2 will be avoided by year. And the investment has been estimated at $1.8 million, assuming 80% subsidy. The cost of electricity for this mini-grid will be 0.29 US dollar per kilowatt hour. And if we compare this price to the selling price imposed by the government of Burkina Faso, we can say that it will be difficult for private sector to make a profit with this kind of investment. Next, please. In the locality of Ledere, the size of solar mini-grid system has been estimated at 200 kilowatt peak for a production of 397,000 kilowatt hour per year. About 272 households and income generating activities will benefit from this energy, and about 153 tons of CO2 a year. The investment has been estimated at $1.1 million and assuming an 80% subsidy, the cost of electricity will be $0.31 per kilowatt hour. And if we compare this price to the selling price imposed by the government, we can say that it will be difficult for the private sector to make a profit. Next, please. In terms of policy and regulation, the study found that there are no specific regulations for solar mini-grid system, and the price of electricity at the national level is standardized. There are existing subsidy for diesel mini-grid systems. It's about 80% for fuel and 100 for food. But for the solar mini-grid system, there are no subsidies. And the right business model to scaling up solar mini-grid system in Burkina Faso is a public-private partnership, and about more than 9,000 people will benefit from this investment, and about 52% of women of them will benefit. As a perspective, next please. We have to mobilize grants to support private investment in the solar mini-grid system, and also do advocacy for diversified tariff according to the production cost, and push the government of Burkina Faso to adopt a specific regulation for solar mini-grid to encourage the private investment in solar mini-grid systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose. The next speaker is Mr. Seta Verorborn, the Asia lead of the Energy Transformation Initiative at Mott MacDonald. His current role is Solar Account Leader for Northeast Asia and Asia Energy Transformation Initiative Leader. He's responsible for developing strong and robust client relationship and developing Mott MacDonald's energy consultancy business in the region. And he will now be telling us about powering communities with aquatic resources. Please, Mr. Seta, the floor is yours.
Thanks for the nice introduction, Laura. Can you hear me and see my screen?
Perfectly, thank you.
It's all good, thanks. In terms of aquatic renewables, I'm just going to share some of the case studies of floating solar and offshore wind project in Asia, because this would be also applicable to other regions as well. just quickly, for those who haven't heard of McDonald before, we are a global consultancy firm around the world. We're helping our client create new infrastructures for transport, energy, water, and buildings. For renewable energy specifically, we have done over 140 gigawatt of renewable globally, with around 40 gigawatt of renewable in Asia Pacific. And when I've mentioned renewable, it's more specifically on solar power and onshore, offshore wind projects. We have also done other type of energy projects as well. And these are our energy offices within Asia Pacific only, where our renewable experts are located. Just a quick overview of who we are and where we're from and where we are based. So I did mention floating solar and offshore wind projects, right? I'm just going to start with floating solar itself. So this is a graphic that have been extracted by the World Bank report. The report is called Where the Sun Meets Water. You can just try to look it up. I think the key point here is that up to 2012, there was really only 100 gigawatt scale of floating projects. Only after 2016, where we started to see like megawatt scale, and at the moment we started to see some of the projects above 100 megawatt. Most of them are all on freshwater so far. I think Mr. Nishan did mention earlier about a 600 megawatt project. That is one example of the change that have been made in this market. And just I think one key highlight here is that if as the mid of 2018, the total installed capacity of floating solar is around 1.1 gigawatt, right? And interestingly, this is the same install capacity of ground-mounted PV project back in 2000. And in the same report, it also mentioned that in the world, there is around 400,000 square kilometer of man-made reservoir. If we only cover 2.5% of those areas with solar panel, you'll be getting around 1,000 gigawatt of floating project. And that 1,000 gigawatt already equal to the total PV install capacity as of today. So there's a big potential of floating projects. And you could easily install up to 10% of the total area, and that would equal to about 4 terawatt of PV installation on reservoir. So the floating solar industry itself could actually be equal to the current solar ground-mounted or rooftop solar industry as of today. I think Mr. Nishan mentioned that the global install capacity as of today is around 1.6 gigawatt, and in the next few years, it can easily go up to 4 gigawatt. So I think just a big overview that given the pressure on the land use and complex geographical condition and topographical condition, floating solar is definitely one of the options to consider. And just to give an overview of some of the example large-scale project that we have done before. The one on the left is a 370 megawatt floating solar on one of the world's largest dam in Pakistan, and we've been helping our client to develop this project. The one on the right is the biggest floating solar on seawater under operation in Taiwan, which this would definitely be more relevant to some of the coastal city or town community that would like to connect to electricity, but there are no but there are some land constraint or maybe the topographical condition would not allow you to do normal solar PV projects. Having said that, there are some complications with seawater floating solar as well, mainly related to tidal wave and corrosion issues. And these are just a few examples of floating solar that we have been done in the regions in Taiwan, Vietnam, South Korea, and Philippines. But in addition to the project that we have been involved, there have been extensive development of floating on reservoir in Indonesia, India, Malaysia, and Vietnam as well. I think some of the exciting projects are, just for example, 1.3 gigawatt floating solar in Laguna Bay in Philippines. Singapore just do the biggest one in the country. It's only 5 megawatt, and there's another 2.1 gigawatt on the coast of the Yellow Sea in South Korea. So exciting time for floating solar. Few other things to be careful of is that like the technical standard of floating solar is still evolving, so we should try to always keep monitoring it. You need to have a careful consideration of the wind load, and in some cases in combination with the wave as well. Maybe for some of the larger projects covering large water surface, you have to consider water variation and change in the water bed and how you, because it will affect how you decide the mooring anchoring system. And if it's possible, we always recommend for you to set up a floating PV test bed for the project. It would be highly beneficial for the development and project financing. So this is a floating solar projects. Moving on to offshore wind. Offshore wind technologies itself is a really active market with massive potential, and this will also increasingly dominate the renewable energy spectrum in the place like Europe and in Asia. It would normally, however, be an utility scale solution. So I think, I mean, in terms of connecting this with the city, this could be a part of the plan for a city or isolated grid, for example, some island communities. This slide is just to show some example of the key milestone and our involvement throughout the history of the offshore wind industry. I think the first offshore wind farm was back in 1991, developed by Dong Energy, now Ørsted, and it's already been dismantled in 2017. And ever since that, there has been a lot of development in Europe and in the US and now subsequently in Asia. Just moving forward to now, in Asia, there have been a lot of activities and development in offshore wind project in China, in Taiwan, in Japan, and also in South Korea. Especially South Korea, I think the latest offshore wind project development plan is around 20 gigawatt by 2030. So that is a really, really big goal compared to other countries in the region, except for China. So the global capacity of offshore wind farm is around 50-60 gigawatt at the moment, and it will expand to around 600 gigawatt by 2050, the global number, with the biggest growth in Asia of around 12 to 16% per year. I think this is in line with what have been discussed earlier. China is still the biggest player in the region, following by Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. But there are a lot of perspective on potential countries in Southeast Asia, especially in Vietnam and Philippines as well, and also maybe in Indonesia and Thailand. With Mark, we also been talking about to some of the city level developer on how do we connect offshore wind projects to their city as well. So in terms of challenges, based on what we have seen in our projects, I mean, we have to admit that offshore wind is a highly complex project to build with a lot of physical and contractual interfaces and challenges. So I think a couple of things to be aware of is that there are massive constraint in the supply chain at the moment. For example, subsea cable, vessel installation. So you need to have a lead time to try to contract or order this equipment or vessel installation, for example. There are some of the localization issues, for example, in Taiwan. And most of the knowledge of developing, constructing, operating offshore wind project right now in Europe, and so we have to make sure that we do have some of the people that do have that European experience within our team to build a project in Asia or in other regions. The contracting strategy is important because normally multi-contract strategy. So we have to make sure that works will be assigned to the most competent contractors and with detailed interface metrics. We have to well plan the ground investigation for all the wind turbine locations to make sure that it will not have the effect after the design or the beginning of the construction phase where it would significantly cost the project more. And it's also quite important to include the O&M aspect, or we include the O&M contractors or O&M team from the design stage, just to make sure that the design will take into account the long-term O&M strategy as well. So these are some of the challenges. There also have been some discussion about the potential link to green hydrogen as well, to make offshore wind more efficient and allow for energy storage of surplus energy. However, this needs some policy changes to drive demand in some of the heavy industry, for example. So just to wrap this up, I think these are the only aquatic options, but the majority of the renewable will still remain land-based, and I think this aquatic renewable will be interesting complementary solutions that we have to be aware of when dealing with land constraints. And I think the technical solution, I think it's just a small part of a successful green city plan, and because there are other aspects as well. For example, collaboration between national and local government in order to have a net zero city or green city, for example. I think that's all for me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Seta. Very interesting, all this. I'm sure people will have questions soon. We still have 2 more presentations to go. In the meanwhile, you can write questions in the chat, and we try to take as many as possible. So our next speaker is Mr. Bimbola Banjo, a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and he will be presenting perspectives on renewable energy technologies and solutions to promote green transition in Africa. He is the finance advisory leader for PricewaterhouseCoopers in Western Africa, and has over 18 years experience in providing assurance and business advisory services to clients. So please, Mr. Banjo, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, thank you to GGGI for inviting me to speak. Greetings from Nigeria, and very quickly, I'm going to go through these slides to talk about what Africa is doing in the renewable space. Stock. Okay, so very quickly, an introduction just to set the context for my presentation, and then what Africa is doing with respect to green transitioning, and then some of the available technologies that is available world over, and what Africa is currently doing and is able to do, and then quick wrap up. So very quickly, it'd be difficult to go through this without sort of looking at Africa at a glance, right? So that way we can put the rest of the session in proper perspective, right? So Africa is a continent with about 1.4 billion people. We're making it the second largest continent with respect to human resources. Sorry to burst some bubbles, but Africa has 54 countries, and it's not a country in itself. And then the largest cities in Africa are actually Lagos and Cairo. Lagos is the business capital of Nigeria, and Cairo the capital of Egypt. Land area of Africa is about 33 million square kilometers, which makes it the second largest continent in land area. Population, the average age of the population in Africa is about 20 years old, which makes it a very young population, and up and coming and upwardly mobile. The urbanization rate is about 44%, which is a reflection of the underdevelopment that exists in certain areas. Of course, life expectancy as well is about 64 years, slightly higher for women in Africa. And then the age dependency is about 78%. Just some clarification there, about 98%, about 96% of the population in Africa is below the age of 64 years old, right? So pretty much about 96% is below retirement age, and then about half of that, right, is below the age of 14. So Africa does indeed have a very young and growing population. Now, Africa needs about 2 terawatts of energy to meet up with the world's average. And to do this in a carbon neutral sort of way, we need to grow our renewables capacity about 20% year on year. And we'll be requiring investments in Africa to the tune of about 2.6 trillion US dollars. Currently, the electrification rate in Africa is about 57%, which is a marked improvement from where it was in the year 2000, where it was about 36%. Out of the 600 million people who don't have access to electricity in Africa, about 472 reside in rural areas. The primary form of electricity generation is from fossil fuels, and only 25% comes from renewable sources, primarily hydro. Of course, recent shifts in the renewable space gives a lot of credence to solar and wind-powered sources of energy. Hydrogen is also big on the radar, but so far hydrogen is we're talking more of gray hydrogen. There's a very big outlook around how we can leverage green energy, green hydrogen as one of our energy mixes. Of course, green hydrogen costs about 3 to 5 times as more when you compare that to gray hydrogen. But primarily, hydrogen is used in the ammonia production, which is a very key component for food security in Africa. Now, talking about the penetration of renewables in Africa, basically we're saying that fossil fuel takes about 74%, wind and solar take about 8% within the renewable space. And of course, we're talking about, to meet the $2.6 billion mark, we're talking about $2.6 trillion mark. We're talking about annual investments of about $100 billion per annum. So this is the scale of the investment that is required. Is required for Africa to actually continue to grow its renewable agenda, right? To meet with the net zero objectives by the middle of the century. To a large extent, about 25% of all the power generated in Africa came from renewable resources, right? But I mean, it's worthy to note that the most significant part of that generation was hydro, and that's actually comes from the Central African or Central and Eastern African bloc within the territory. And Africa generally has about 37 gigawatts of hydroelectric installed capacity, and with the potential to generate about 2 terawatts within the continent in hydro capabilities alone. Now, some of the key factors that have driven the outlook of the energy space within Africa.
Mr.
Right,
Pancho, sorry to interrupt. Please, you have about 2 minutes left. We are mindful of time.
All right. So I'll skim through very quickly. Right. So of course, the Paris agreements, which all 54 African countries had a part or signed up to, the COP26, which held last year, right? And of course, we have that coming up in Egypt in a few weeks' time. COVID-19, that was a major disruptor for us in Africa because, to a large extent, over the last 10 years, renewable energy had grown by about 20% each year. But there was a slowdown in the last 5 years owing to disruptions from COVID-19. And of course, the Russia-Ukraine war as well has seen Africa begin to build additional fossil fuel capabilities in order to meet up with the growing, albeit short-term demand for natural gas. So the questions will be around what happens to all of our investments in the medium to long term. Right. Of course, we're all aware of the growing benefits of renewable energy for societies, building new skills in Africa, the much needed skills that need to be built in Africa. Of course, a big conversation is the just energy transition, which takes into cognizance Africa's capability to meet up with a fast-paced move by the rest of the world in the area of renewable energies, right? So in terms of funding, about 8% of Africa's funding in renewables has come from FDIs, right? But largely, the local governments and the state governments, as well as the IDAs, have been primarily investors in the renewable space. And you can see some of the examples here. The World Bank, as trustees of the Green Climate Fund, provided about $30 million of grants to Central Africa. And recently, about $194 million was provided to Nigeria as well as other West African countries to meet some of its renewable objectives, right? And in terms of some of the leading technologies that we think will be driving the pace of renewables in the next few years, lithium-ion batteries are obviously a preferred option, owing to their flexibility, scalability, and of course, the prices of those batteries are beginning to dip in markets, right? So we're seeing more and more increased use of those ion batteries. Geothermal as well is also something that is very gaining a lot of traction, particularly in Eastern Africa, because Eastern Africa has a very high thermal delta, right? So you don't have to go to very deep levels to get the required level of heat, the heat gradient from below the Earth's crust. But I think one of the things that is changing about this is you're able to now begin to use geothermal in smaller applications, right? So you can use them in your homes, which means you now have to start to pass geothermal fluids into shallower depths to arrive at decent cooling or heating applications for single use. Wind as well is being revolutionized. I listened to the last speaker talk about wind extensively, right? Over the years, the height of the mills have increased, thereby increasing the amount of electricity that you're able to generate from those wind equipment, right? But these days we're having a lot of adjustments to the rotors, to the blades, to transformers, into the different components of the hub within the mill. That's helping to sort of increase the amount of power generated. Solar as well. We're looking at being able to use both sides of the panels to get increasing more energy from the sun. We're also having automated systems that can adjust to the irradiation required from the sun. So obviously, the panels tend to move to where they get the highest irradiation index. Hydropower as well. So apart from building like natural dams along river basins, we're beginning to talk about piped hydropower. So building electric power from piped water flows. So I think this is a very key thing. And I think for Africa as well, hydropower also portends something that helps to manage some of the social and or climate catastrophes, right? Because in recent times, the floods that have happened worldwide.
Excuses, Mr. Banjo. We are unfortunately approaching the timeline for the whole webinar, and we still have one more speaker. Would you like to wrap up with one or two conclusions, possibly, and then we unfortunately have to move on to the next speaker?
All right. So thank you. Just in conclusion, right? Renewable energy has grown by about 20% and continues to grow in Africa. Different regions within Africa have varied. They have varying renewable energy potentials owing to the different geographies within Africa. Adoption of renewable energy will result in great economic benefits within Africa. Now, I think one of the key things to mention here is that funding plays a very big part in Africa's ability to catch up with the rest of the world with respect to renewables. Africa, as you know, contributes about 4% to the global carbon footprint, and we have not industrialized as a result, right? So it's very important that the funding is available to enable Africa catch up with the amount of investment that is required, right, to meet up with some of its net zero capabilities. And there's some quick questions to ask, to be raised here, right? The pace of transition. What pace of transition can Africa really afford, right? How can Africa better leverage international partnerships and technology as it begins to innovate? And is it possible for Africa to leverage some of its current hydrocarbons or fossil deposits to meet up with the pace, the high pace of energy transition? Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Mr. Bancho, for this very comprehensive outlook for Africa. I think you also answered two of the questions that we have received in the meanwhile in the chat, at least partially. So we now move to last speaker, who is Mr. Joseph Silvanus, the Managing Director at Dolma Consulting, who will tell us about an on-grid solar power project at Dang and Kanchanpur in Nepal with a battery energy storage system. He is a career banker with deep working knowledge of financial markets in emerging markets. So we will continue now hearing a bit more detail about the financing side of things. But please, Mr. Silvanus, try to be quick. We can go 5 or 10 minutes past, but not too much. Thank you.
I realize I'm keeping you guys away from your break. So thank you, Laura. You're going to actually have a different perspective from me. I'm sorry I'm not able to get this into slide share mode, so we'll just go ahead with this. Somehow my controls are being warped. I'm taking this call from Kathmandu in Nepal. We're going to talk to you about how to develop solar on-grid utility scale. And you will compare this with some of the conversations that you've seen in Africa, etc. Asia. No longer grant money is available in totality. We're a commercial developer, and I'm also going to talk to you about the funding and how do we manage and how we create the special purpose vehicles. A little tweak on the Dolma Group. We are a UK-based entity focused on Nepal. We're Nepal's largest private equity impact investor. Impact obviously is ESG. And therefore we connect a lot of DFIs and long-term blended capital to come into most of the projects that we do. Dolma Himalayan Energy is the one that we're going to talk to you about. Good team on the ground, reasonable traction. of projects that have been delivered. I think it is what it is. We are generating utility scale, grid connected, battery backed up for the first time ever in Nepal. So this is BESS technology that we are bringing into the country. It's innovation. The cost of the battery, please remember, has dropped tremendously, and it makes commercial operations possible. None of the funding comes from grants. Maybe we want to do 700 megawatt hours in the entire of Nepal. Nepal, as just a contextualized nation for you, is a small country between India and China. It doesn't have a sovereign rating, so people really don't know the cost of doing business in Nepal. But reasonable amount of FDI, and it's typically a hydropower location. We can typically generate maybe 40,000 megawatts of power, but currently 3,000 are being produced, another 6,000 under production. Solar has got a cap on public policy at 10%. We're trying to utilize that cap and drive the complementarity in terms of solar with hydro. I think the projects are underway. This is a potential locations where we're setting up this project. It's very complementary. I want to talk about how do we really do this? We as a private sector developer, this is not a PPP. This is straightforward commercial investment. We have to have a decent IRR for the investors. The project vehicle will see some amount of blending, a minimum concessionality of 10% at least. Convergence, which is a blended finance capital fund out of Toronto, Canada, is coming first. They love this kind of programs, especially given the impact. The impact is huge because even from the first phase of this project, we'll be taking out maybe 250,000 tons of CO2, and by the time we are done in Nepal, we'll be doing 1.5 million tons of CO2 taken off. We've realized that given the soil quality, and my colleague earlier talked about dual purpose of the land, we are bringing agrovoltaics, which is very interesting. We don't want to throw the farmers out. We want to work collaboratively with them. And therefore, we want to create cooperatives wherein they work in communes, work below the solar panels. It's an additional cost. It'll cut down on our IRR. We have to be very careful in terms of how do we bring them in, how do we blend them in, what are the roles and responsibilities that we provide to them. So agrovoltaics is certainly an opportunity you must all consider, and I'm sure you all are looking at it, because in Asia, and especially South Asia, there's a lot of landless farmers. And if we are ultimately going to be an impact company, and the project has to deliver impact, we have to see ways and means to mainstream them and work with them. So these are just called out on the technology. Technology, it can be delivered. The issue is commercial and financial viability and sustainability long term. Nepal doesn't have dollar PPAs. The power purchase agreements last for 25 years. It's in local Nepali. So we have to be careful about hedging. We don't even have hedging out here in Nepal, like most mature markets. So if you have to hedge for the first phase, $150 million of investments for a 25-year PPA, which is denominated in local currency, it's a huge ask. So these are some of the commercial aspects that you'll have to keep in mind. I can only tell you, and I cannot share the IRRs that we are projecting. It's very interesting, but you have to have a way to deliver some of these capitals in a very blended fashion. Our future projects obviously are in the area of the renewable energy, electric vehicles, green hydrogen. People spoke about it earlier, so I won't allude about it. We don't have a single urea or fertilizer plant in Nepal. Everything gets imported. Our import bill is around $1.5 billion every year just on fertilizer. So if we can use surplus hydropower or solar energy green to get green hydrogen and thereafter green ammonia and urea, maybe certainly an import substitution element that we can consider. In the interest of time, I will stop here, Laura.
Thank you so much. And your presentation is very much appreciated. as is the insight of all of our presenters today. So we were planning a questions and answers session, but the time is short. So I will now actually hand over to Dr. Malle Fofana, the Director and Head of Programs for the Africa region in GGGI. But Malle, you might also want to refer to one of the questions we got, which I believe was on GGGI's outlook on wind power in Africa. So over to you, Malle, please.
Thanks very much, Laura, and thanks also for all the panelists for sharing this kind of insight on energy sectors. And there's a couple of things that I hear during the different presentations that are quite interesting to hear from Africa and Asia as well. So I will say that solar PV and wind power are spreading around the world, and we all know there's a lot of potential for these developing countries, especially in Africa and Asia. And the question, and I think Nishan mentioned at the beginning, is that how we can accelerate renewable energy deployment, because some of the technology already proven. Now it's about having the right business model that can attract mostly private financial sectors, but also what are the implications of the public sector to put the enabling environment for them. We also hear from Ose from Burkina Faso, from the result from the pre-feasibility study from the private sector, level of attractivity of the product is not really viable in a certain way, right, due to the pricing issue regarding Burkina Faso. So with that said, it's quite important to have a look on what are the right business model to scaling up and accelerate, that potential in Africa. That's one. And the second is when it's come to the new, let's say, technology or new alternative that we mentioned that have a lot of potential, green hydrogen, floating as well. What are also the right business model that we put in place to really make involvement in the private sector? And that also put at the role that the public sector can play when it's come to putting the right incentive, putting in place the right pricing system, enabling environment that can also de-risk the mechanism for private sector to be in. And at the same time, also looking for the financial sector side, how they can play a critical role on that particular element. So I think there's a lot of potential, a lot of conversation that we can learn from different countries, and that's why we have the GG Week and the GG platform as well. But what I can say as well is that can be really important to integrate also the green job aspect, as we know that the energy sectors will also imply of 122 million people as a job until for 2050, which is a huge and large potential to size. Now the question is how we can put in place again the right business model for it. So I think it's really interesting to hear the different perspective. What I can say is that that learning process should continue, because we hear a lot from Nepal, we hear a lot also from the Pricewaterhouse landscape for Africa, Nishan, what they did in different countries as a business model. So I think it's really good to hear from there how we can just really accelerate the deployment, because it's quite important, and then move forward with the right financial mechanism and policy in place to enable that. So with that said, I would say thank you again for joining, and thank you also for sharing those perspectives. And I wish you also best for the remaining days with the GG Week. Thanks all.
Many thanks, Malle. So now on behalf of GGGI, I would like to thank the presenters for today's presentations. Your time and expertise shared today are very inspiring, and we hope this event for its part advances also the dissemination of these approaches and lessons learned. I would also like to thank all our audience for joining this event. You may check out the upcoming events of the GGG Week 2022 on our website, www.gggi.org. The recordings also of all these this week's events will be uploaded on this website later on. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a nice day.
Thank you.